President Trump visited UN headquarters in New York this week to shine a light on the problem of global religious persecution. In doing so, he became the first U.S. president in history to host a meeting at the UN on the subject of religious freedom. Joining me now with his analysis of this historic event is the Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom at the U.S. State Department, Sam Brownback. Mr. Ambassador, thank you for being with us. I want to give people a glimpse of the president's global call to protect religious freedoms. Here's how he began.
The United States is founded on the principle that our rights do not come from government, they come from God. Regrettably, the religious freedom enjoyed by American citizens is rare in the world. Approximately 80% of the world's population live in countries where religious liberty is threatened, restricted, or even banned. Today, with one clear voice, the United States of America calls upon the nations of the world to end religious persecution.
Ambassador Brownback, President Trump also announced the U.S. is committing $25 million to protect religious freedoms, religious sites and relics from attacks. How will that money be used?
That's being developed now. Next week, I'll be at a conference in Morocco that we're going to be doing with AID and others in the Moroccan government to discuss these religious heritage sites, many of them that have been degraded, fallen into disrepair, or in some cases destroyed because of opposition to that faith. And we're going to be talking about how do those things get protected, how can we lift them back up, and how can we make them into the valuable sites again that they are, and the world can recognize the beauty of what they've given to their countries and their areas.
Now, Ambassador Brownback, how practically will this initiative work that the president unveiled at the UN? How do you and your confreres interact with these other countries to move forward the cause of religious liberty and freedom?
You know, I think these things are tied together. The big thing the president put out, though, was the International Religious Freedom Alliance. And the Secretary Pompeo talked even further about that, about if you're a country that loves religious freedom, come join us. So we are asking for other nations who value and treasure and are willing to push for religious freedom to join us in this alliance to push this cause around the world, because religious freedom has degraded over the years, and we've got so many people, records numbers of people, being persecuted for their faith now.
Now, some critics say that the president's call for this protection of religious freedom is a play to his political base. Other critics, like Rabbi Jack Moline, who's president of the Interfaith Alliance, say this: President Trump was elected on the promise of a complete and utter shutdown of Muslim immigration in the U.S. Since then, his administration has worked tirelessly to redefine religious freedom as a license to discriminate. End quote. How would you respond to that?
I totally disagree with this. Here is a fundamental human right, the First Amendment to the United States Constitution and our Bill of Rights. It's in the UN Declaration of Human Rights, one of the fundamental charters, Section 18, is about religious freedom, but it has been degraded over the years, and nobody has stood up and fought for it. This administration is fighting for this right for people everywhere, all the time, around the world. The United States, we're not perfect by any means, but we're one of the best in the world on religious freedom, and we're going to push that because it's a fundamental right. It's a God-given right for everybody, everywhere around the world.
Ambassador, approximately 80%, as the president said, 80% of the world's population live in countries where religious liberty is threatened, restricted, or banned. Did the president raise religious rights with Pakistan's PM or Egyptian President al-Sisi?
I don't know if he raised it specifically with them. We have it in our report every year. We do a religious freedom report. The United States government does. It's the gold standard around the world, and we raise those issues and put them out there. And then I discuss it, and the Secretary of State's discuss it. I don't know about the president's meetings if he has or not. But I'd also say on this, Raymond, this administration has done more to pursue and push international religious freedom than any administration has before. We are pushing it. We're certainly not perfect, but this needs to have a broad basis of push. We'll have a meeting in the Vatican with the Vatican officials next week to discuss this very topic of religious freedom and how we push it together.
Ambassador, how does the U.S. justify relations with countries like with China, who are some of the worst abusers of religious freedom, or Saudi Arabia? How do you square that with this devotion to human rights and religious rights?
You'd square it under the idea that we need to engage. And I've been very critical of both of those governments, and many people around the United States government have. But we believe it better in those cases to engage and to try to push them on forward. In some cases, we put some pretty heavy sanctions on forward, and people they don't like that. But I think it's key that we do engage. But the bigger piece on this right now, Raymond, is this alliance. We need it to be more than the United States. We need it to be other nations to engage and help us with this push.
President Trump also used his time at the UN to speak on the international right to life. Here's what he said.
Americans will also never tire of defending innocent life. We are aware that many United Nations projects have attempted to assert a global right to taxpayer-funded abortion on demand, right up until the moment of delivery. Global bureaucrats have absolutely no business attacking the sovereignty of nations that wish to protect innocent life. Like many nations here today, we in America believe that every child, born and unborn, is a sacred gift from God.
Ambassador Brownback, you were there at the UN. How was that received by the international community? What did people tell you?
Well, I think people receive it as this is a clear statement from the United States president. There are nations and places that don't agree with it. There are groups and causes that do agree with it. And this is one of the key divisive issues of the day, is the question about the sacredness of human right and human life, and when does that attach? We believe it begins at the very moment of conception. And the president was bold and aggressive in putting that statement out in front of the UN. I'm not sure if something that clear has been said by a United States president ever before.
No, not at the UN. No, not at that level. In fact, I can remember covering Hillary Clinton years ago at the UN Population Conference, where it was just the opposite message. Nonetheless, several countries and women's groups have expressed alarm at those comments. They claim the U.S. is putting unfair pressure on poor countries that depend on U.S. aid to deny women abortion access. You would say what?
Well, I would say this has been a long-term political debate in the United States on this taxpayer funding of abortion. And you generally get a Democrat administration in, and they want to fund it. You get a Republican administration in, they don't want to fund it. I'd say this is part of that ongoing discussion and debate within the United States. Other nations need to decide their own position and view on this issue of the sacredness of life.
Climate change really was center stage at these UN meetings earlier in the week. Pope Francis even sent a message to the UN where he had this to say.
Junto a tantas iniciativas, no solo por parte de los gobiernos, sino de toda la sociedad civil, es necesario preguntarse si existe una verdadera voluntad política para destinar mayores recursos humanos, financieros y tecnológicos a fin de mitigar los efectos negativos del cambio climático y ayudar a las poblaciones más pobres y vulnerables, que son las que más lo sufren. Aunque la situación no es buena y el planeta sufre, la ventana para una oportunidad está todavía abierta, todavía estamos a tiempo. No dejemos que se cierre. Humano integral para asegurar a las generaciones futuras una vida mejor. El futuro es de ellos, no nuestro.
Ambassador, what do you make of the Pope suggesting that there's a lack of political will to deal with climate change and really throwing the moral force of the Vatican behind it?
Well, this is not my portfolio, obviously, because I'm in the religious freedom space. But what I would say on this issue is that the United States is very concerned about what takes place to the environment. And we've been one of the more aggressive countries on cutting back our impact to the environment. even though we don't get a lot of credit for it because the rhetoric sometimes is seen as in a different category, if you look at the actual efforts and the actual things that have been done by the United States and by a number of good groups in the United States to reduce the CO2 emissions and to really be effective in this space, there are not many countries that have been as successful in addressing this issue as the United States, even if the rhetoric that is such that what people don't like.
Before I let you go, Ambassador Brownback, in China this week, Christian churches have been ordered to take down displays of the Ten Commandments and replace them with quotes from Xi Jinping, which promote socialism and warn against the influence of the West on China. Now, some have not complied, and they've been imprisoned or the church has been shut down. Worshippers at non-compliant churches have reportedly been threatened with governmental blacklisting, restricted travel. The children of some believers have been barred from schools and jobs. Your response to that story?
Well, my response is just, I think this is horrific of what's taking place in China. China's at war with faith. It's a war with all faiths. It's at war with Christians. It's been at war with Muslims, with Tibetan Buddhists, Falun Gong groups. And I think this should stop. They are signed on to the UN Declaration of Human Rights. They have in their Chinese constitution the right to religious freedom, and yet they're persecuting their own people. And it doesn't mean that in a faith that you can write the faith the way you want it in your country. Christianity was written a long time ago. It doesn't need to be sinicized. And so really, I would hope they would stand up for the right of the Chinese citizen to practice their own faith the way they see fit, rather than being driven into this dogmatic, government-run view of a faith that's not the true faith itself.
Sam Brownback, thank you so much for being with us. And to learn more about the work of the Ambassador at Large on behalf of international religious freedom, you can visit the U.S. State Department website there at state.gov. Thank you for being here.